them to do something that is pretty boring, but something that they absolutely have to do. So we've been working on like creative things because we do all the calling, the texting. That's a big one. We've got a standard text message that we like to send out to people who have signed up for texting with the link in it. One of the things that we are trying to do better in the coming months is getting people to use the app more, because I don't think we have too many of our students doing that. But just trying to make it fun for our students to go out and do it without actually being able to physically track them down. It's just kind of what we've been doing.
Great, thank you. Okay, panelists have all had a chance to speak, so I'd like to see if there's anyone, any participants that have anything different or any other ideas. If anyone would like to chime in and share anything that your campus is doing, or any comments that anyone has. I'm going to give you just a couple seconds. Hopefully someone will be brave and take themselves off mute. Or you can type it in the chat as well.
I thought of something that it would be interesting to hear from the whole panel. How many of you use your influencers? And by that I mean coaches to help you, activity directors, getting them on board to help you get the students on board. You have any fun ways that you do that?
Ours isn't really anything special other than just letting the coaches know that we've sent out those emails that we're doing, so that way they're aware of it. Certain coaches are a little more responsive than others, and you know, may offer opportunities to where we can reach out to their students or to their team members, or maybe they'll, in the past I've had scenarios where one of the teams might have us come in and chat with the group a little bit just to reinforce the importance, but other than that, that's about the extent we've seen.
I say that we did get a turning point this year on that particular avenue, because we finally got one coach to understand the link between student coming back, an athlete coming back and focused on athletics, versus one who's a little more of a trouble. They had to chase down, especially with COVID and how students, we were all worried, you know, about whether or not these kids were going to come back. We had some problems with that, and the ones that they had the most problem with were kids who didn't get their FAFSA done on time. And like you were saying, Tony, were in summer and didn't have a FAFSA, and no indication that they were planning on doing a FAFSA. Those were the hardest ones to get thinking about coming back. And so I think the coaches for the first time this year realized that getting that FAFSA done early so we can get some information is critical. So they're helping us.
Well, and along those lines, Brenda, I think the thing that I've enjoyed the most about this is while we're trying to promote them getting their FAFSA done, like I mentioned, if we've got, you know, we've had between 1,900 students over the past, 2-3 years, and if only 2/3 of them are actually filing the FAFSA, what is truly helpful for us is getting the response from those that will not be filing the FAFSA. So we're not waiting on them. We can get them processed, done, and then if they've got requests afterwards, it's great. But at least we are seeing, even if it's kind of a frustrated, hey, I told you I'm not going to be doing this. Well, did you really, or whatever the case is, but thank you for reaching out to us. That communication is always very helpful to ensure that we're all on the same page.
We've got Argos sending lists of our teams with a series of things that the students need to do, FAFSA, insurance waivers, different things that the coaches get every morning so that they can see who's done it, who hasn't done it. They don't have to call us about it. And that's really helped our coaches to know what's going on.
Great, thank you for sharing. Darcy, I see your hand raised. Do you have something you'd like to add?
It was along the lines of what Brenda said with using Zoom. We did do Zoom with breakout rooms for our FAFSA completion nights with the area high schools that we usually go out to, with varying degrees of success or non-success this year. But the one thing that we're doing in the office, because we've tried offering FAFSA completion times in computer labs on campus, and it's never attended, or very, like, maybe one or two attend. And we've always told people you can come in the office and we'll help you, and very few take us up on that. Our school is using bookings through Microsoft Teams. And so we added another category in October for FAFSA completion support. And that has actually been really popular. And we've had a lot of students taking advantage of that since we implemented it.
I like that rename, Darcy. That's a great idea.
I'll add in quickly, a couple years ago when I was the director, we got really involved with the athletic coaches on that, and started designating times with the coaches. Of course, you got to get them on board, and this was before COVID, but in practices where the practice would be dedicated, we'd use a computer lab, and part of practice was they were coming in to do their FAFSAs. And so it just got it started, had luck with the baseball and football teams, which were two of our challenging populations with getting it all in. So I'd say keep asking your coaches, see if you can get, and theater was another one, just different groups of people on campus that we could access through a sponsor or coach of somehow. Okay, one last call for any other panelists to share anything. Otherwise, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the second quarter. I'm gonna wait just a minute to see if anyone else has anything to add. All right, it's quiet. So we're gonna go on to quarter two. Our topic for second quarter is engaging staff during COVID-19. And panelists, I think at this time, if you could, before you begin your speaking on this topic, if you could let us know if you are currently working on campus, and if your team is currently working on campus, or if you're currently remote, or how you guys are running the show right now. So this time, let's start with Tony.
Okay, during the COVID scenario for us, when it was basically started back in February during our spring break time, it was February or March, one of the two, but anyway, that began the period when the students didn't come back, and we were basically instructed that all of our work was to be done off-site. And we proceeded that way through, I believe it was between June and July when we were all enabled to come back on campus. A number of us we were allowed to come back on, but they were deemed, each office had to really deem what we needed to be functional. And some of us had laptops, some of us didn't. So, but during that time, Zoom meetings were a blessing. I mean, we already have it scheduled where we have a weekly staff meeting, but not only did we have Zoom meetings for our staff meetings, but we also utilized Microsoft Teams at that time. We use it basically for the instant messaging side of it. So we're constantly communicating with each other. And even though we're all on campus now, we're still, IM each other whenever it comes to asking just simple questions. But communication has been huge with us because of just the changes and the uncertainties of everything that goes on. So I truly love my staff in terms of how open we all are to ideas, questions, thoughts. And with that, it's been very helpful that we really haven't seen a huge interruption in our capability to be able to communicate.
Thanks, Tony. Jana, I'll have you go next, and let us know if there's anything that you've done remotely as far as getting staff on board or engaged, or any activities or games or fun things you've done during this time too.
Yeah, so our staff, so we have traditional and a non-traditional kind of a adult program campus. And then we have our School of Nursing. campus. So our School of Nursing campus stayed in person the entire time, obviously due to clinicals and stuff like that. So anything that they could continue to stay in class for at the School of Nursing, they did. Our traditional campus in Baldwin City, obviously everyone went remote. And that was the same way with Overland Park. They started bringing our traditional campus folks back June 1 with limited staff and kind of a 2-week bringing more and more on. So that's kind of where we were at. As far as engaging, a lot like what Tony said, we use Teams and Zoom. We've done some games, some bingo, just to try and that team building aspect that you're losing by being virtual. But I don't know that I was real successful with it. So I would gladly take other ideas from other people. Our Overland Park staff, a good chunk of them are still remote. That's our adult campus, and we just don't have the students coming back to campus yet. And so any ideas that anybody has to help us out with that, to keep that staff engaged, is good. But we've just tried to not only have the meetings, but also have a time where you can just chat or have fun together, kind of like you do in the office. Make space for that, I guess.
Thank you, Jana. Tom, do you want to address this a little bit as far as engaging your staff during COVID or during them working remotely?
Yeah, so we went remote March 14th. Not that any of us were keeping track at work. We were told at 4:30 to take your stuff home, and I told my group to take everything home and act like we're staying home for either 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, and heck, even 2 years. So we all took everything home. Monitors, I've got quite the little setup, and so do all of my staff. But we've never returned to the building. It's been 7 months now, almost 8. Sorry. But yeah, during that time, we did find that we have a really good staff, and they're real tight knit. So when you're sitting right next to someone, you can talk to them. We had to find ways of replacing the day-to-day interactions. Like I always went around and said hello to everybody in the morning. Now you have to do it by chat or by Zoom. We really do utilize a group chat where it's everybody. At their suggestion, they wanted one with me on it and one without me on it. I was totally fine with that, as long as the one without me on it was, within reason of what they should be talking about. Like, it still has to be, work related and somewhat work related, I'd say, but keeping it inbound sort of thing. So, they really enjoy that, so they can still chat about things, like what they did that weekend, all that fun stuff. We do a really good job of making sure that we recognize what people are doing. So when somebody has a really good day of, whatever we're looking at that day, we always make sure to at least recognize it, talk about it in the mornings in the chats, be like, hey, Tim, talked to 700 students yesterday. It's an exaggeration, but whatever somebody did really well that day. We do have a weekly stand-up meeting because my office is also attached to student accounts, so we're student financial services. We have a hour-long meeting every Wednesday where we just talk about whatever. We go through the weekly update that gets sent out, and then we just talk for 45 minutes. It's usually ran by me or one of the other directors. Last week, I think we talked about what is everybody binging. That was interesting, because if you get staff talking, they will just talk forever, and we had to end it. But during that time, we shut the phones off, where nobody's doing anything work related. We are just there to talk and make sure we're all not going crazy. I found that I needed to do the same thing with my managers. This is going to sound cruel, but we do have a standing 4:25 on a Friday meeting. But it's the same principle. We just meet, we talk about what happened that week. We laugh, we make fun of each other for stuff that you did. Usually they're making fun of me, but that's okay. If they're happy, I'm happy, right? But we do kind of utilize like pop-up meetings where we just talk about things as they come up. We try not to do we need to address an issue and you just send out an email. That doesn't help anyone, because there's tone and text in an email that you can't convey. So try to do everything in person. We got tons of Zoom meetings that we just hop in and talk about stuff. Then we also do like to try to keep it fun. For October, we do like wellness challenges or something like that to kind of get people like engaged in something not related to work. We also did a Halloween themed meeting where you wore your stuff in. I went as a grumpy financial aid administrator, but who would have thought, right? But finally, I'll stop talking. If you haven't noticed, I'll just keep talking and talking. I don't know if anybody noticed it, but there was an article out in EdSurge about 2-3 months ago about burnout is coming to campus. When that came out, we talked about that quite a bit. Because it talks about how we've all been working from home for so long that it feels like we're already in week 12 of a 16-week semester, but it's only July 1. And I was like, wow, this is like a good portion of my staff. So we had to make a conscientious effort to make people take vacation days, or like take an afternoon off. We'd be like, hey, you've been doing great this week. Leave at noon on Friday or something. Because when you're at home, I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but you're at home working and it's now become your workspace, not your home space. I work in my basement, so it's no longer fun, but we had to recognize that for staff to kind of keep them going and realize that they do need to take some time and step away, but also recognize that they do have kids at home, so they may have to take time and step away in the middle of the day, kind of unannounced. But yeah, that's what we've been doing.
Yeah. Those are some very, very good points, Tom, with as far as making sure your staff is okay and making sure that they're taking the time and stepping away from their home office. It's easy to get sucked in when you work from home, for sure. Brenda, do you have some more to share on how you've engaged your staff?
Yeah, I mean, we're all here. We're all in person right now. So it's back to normal, other than, we're just, we have to brainstorm about COVID protocols, how to keep people safe while they're in the office and coming into the office, because our students come in. So we've done some of that. But back when we were virtual, which was all summer, March until about June, we were at home. And we still have one gal whose kids are in the school system. Hang on just a second. I'm going to close my door, because they're getting loud. So, I don't know if you could hear them, but I could. So they're, but we have one gal whose kids are still in the school system. So she, her schedule is dependent upon her kids and whether or not their classes are quarantined or what all. So, back when we were all online, we were meeting very similar to what you all are saying, but the one thing we did that was very effective to sort of create and continue the informal environment piece was we would meet at the beginning of the day and we would meet at the end of the day. And then we had everybody log their time on a shared drive on our team site. And so on our SharePoint site. And it was a shared document, an Excel spreadsheet, and it went a long ways actually in helping everybody see what everybody's working on. It also showed, as we all were working, what we did from hour to hour. So that was, I think, very effective. And then meeting at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, we met for a half hour, but we would be silly. We would play. We are very good in general, even now with Zoom chat, just being goofy on Zoom. We'll do that a lot. We use Zoom to help each other and to be goofy together with GIFs and stuff like that. So I think it's important to keep up that informal stuff, because that's what makes you tick. And the other thing I would add is, your people, right? When you're a manager, your people. I know that I have some introverts who are fine, who are perfectly happy being at home. I am one of those. But I also know I have some extroverts. I have one extrovert, pretty hardcore extrovert. She struggled during the time when we were at home. And so I made it a point to reach out to her just a little more as a supervisor, just to keep her because she feeds off that in-person environment. She feeds off people, and when she's when she's at home all by herself all day long doing her work, she gets no feedback, no in-person feedback. So I knew she was struggling, and so I would reach out to her just a little more, definitely on Zoom, definitely on camera, and just chat, connect. How you doing? Oh, that's great. You know, what you working on? Because I knew she needed it. So I think it's important to remember who you've gotten on your team, who's on your team, and what they need.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've been doing a presentation for the last several months called Managing Remote Teams. And in that's one of the big things that we speak to is knowing your staff if you do know them. There's always the challenge of having a new staff member. So then you have to really plan on how to get to know them in the virtual environment. I work virtually 100% of the time now. So we really utilized my manager and some tips and tricks that she's had and done. Themed meetings is always fun. A good one that just came to me recently was someone had the idea of sharing your yearbook photo, your senior yearbook photo. So if you guys need an idea for a Zoom meeting, that might be a fun one to pull out. I also wrote down just kind of keeping those meetings sacred. So Brenda, I hadn't heard anyone say yet in all of my different discussions this year, anyone say the morning and afternoon check-in. That's really good. I'll probably add that to my presentation as an idea. But the team meetings are even more sacred when you're in a stressful, struggling environment. When I was a director, I would sometimes catch myself canceling those because there was just too much going on that I needed to take care of that day, or just, I don't feel like we have enough that we need to meet. But really those meetings sometimes are just about keeping your team engaged with each other, and being able to say, hi, how's your kid? How's your husband? How's your dog? How's your house project? And checking in on each other in those real life ways, and not just 100% work. It's good to remember that we are people at times like this. So anyone else want to share any way that you've been engaging with your teammates or with your team during these times? I'll give you just a couple minutes. We'll do a count. I should have a timer for a countdown to halftime here. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody raise a hand or chat. So
I think someone in your room had a question, Crystal. I heard a little baby noise.
I have a little, I'll show you my mascot later. He's crawling around over there making noises. Yes, my 10-month-old is my coworker these days, so it keeps life interesting, especially on Zoom meetings. Especially now that he's mobile and he likes to talk and scream every now and then. Okay, we are gonna go to halftime, and Darcy, you had a question earlier that I'm gonna go up and find. Pop quiz, she said. So Darcy had a question of which Kansas university had the head basketball coach that coined / made popular the full court press. Does anybody? I don't know that, so that's why I wanted to go back to it. Does anybody know the answer? If not, Darcy's gonna have to chime in and tell us because I don't know the answer.
I Googled something and I found Hiawatha, Kansas, but I don't know. I mean, that's where the guy was from, I think, that coined the phrase, but I couldn't find anything about a Kansas school unless it was KU, because I think he went there.
That's
okay.
what I would have guessed is KU, but I don't know.
Julie, do you know?
Oh,
I don't. I mean, the first thing I thought of was James Naismith, who created basketball, but I guess I'm wrong because I see you nodding your head that I'm wrong. So this referee's out.
It was, I believe, Greg Johnson, and he actually became the head coach of Wichita University in 1928, and which is now the Wichita State University. And then he was actually born in Emporia, Kansas, so another fun fact there. And then after he coached at Wichita, he went to another Kansas university. There is at least one person in this meeting right now that works at that university. And then he was the head football coach there. So any guesses?
We don't know sports metaphors, but man, can we process some verification in RTP forms.
All right, so the mascot for this team that he coached football for is the Yotes.
That's Kansas Wesleyan, right?
Yep.
I find myself wondering how many name changes, Julie, has Wichita State been through?
We are only on number 3. We were Fairmount College.
Yes,
Then
that's
we were the University of Wichita, and then we are Wichita State University.
very good.
Now, kudos to those of you who know that we started out as the Wheat Shockers because our football team actually shocked wheat back in the day to earn money for their uniforms. So that is how then Shockers became known. That's my admissions fact for the day for honorary admissions team leader.
Do you know that, well, we'll talk separately, but Southwestern and Wichita have some history when you were Fairmont.
Ah, nice.
Emporia State's on their 4th name, Julie, so I understand.
My ears perked up when Janice said something about Hiawatha because that's where I live right now. And it's like, wait a minute. It's not where I grew up. I've been there for 20 years, but that one threw me off a little.
One last fun.
Apparently, the name I looked up was not the same one Darcy was referring to.
I was listening to a podcast and there's an actor that went to school at Benedictine. So my ears perked up when he was talking about where he went to college at. I was like, hey, I know Tony. So
Which actor was it?
David Koechner.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, his brother used to live in Hiawatha. He now lives down here in Atchison, and he was in our, went to church with him and was in our Knights of Columbus Council. And he's a pharmacist. So yes, he's got a number of pharmacies around here. So yes, I definitely, that's who I thought you were referring to.
All right, I'm buzzing the buzzer. We're gonna come back to the second half here. And don't be shy, participants. Please, this is meant for you to ask questions too. So hopefully you have some hot topics for overtime that you're ready to shoot at us. But we're gonna go into the third quarter and we're gonna talk about supporting students during COVID-19. So kind of along the same lines of how things are different this year. We talked FAFSA a little bit, but just in general with collecting documentation, communicating with them in any ways, on campus versus remote. So this time we're going to start with Jana.
Okay, so I would say a good chunk of our communication with students is already done via email. So that obviously didn't change even when we went virtual. We did try to give an extra opportunity by putting something out on our website, letting students know that they could schedule a Zoom with us. And it was more of an admissions, it was on their page. So it was geared towards our incoming students, of course, for the fall, because we were most worried about them. But our returning students found it because I had several, requests or whatever for meetings. But basically it ran a list of like different thoughts or topics that you might have questions on. And then of course, one of them being financial aid or the financing of your education, that type of thing. And so the admissions staff would get those and they would route them to the appropriate department. So it ran the gamut as far as ideas and questions that the student might have. So we tried that. I wouldn't say it was as successful as we had hoped, but I think looking back, what we might have been able to do is maybe email that same form to all of our to our current students to see where they were struggling and the stuff that they need there. I know our Dean of Students did a lot, but as far as financial aid, we did not really do much different in this aspect other than just sending out timely reminders, letting them know, if they hadn't done their FAFSA, that they needed to do it in order to be packaged. If there was verification, we were trying to, just be a little, and maybe it was too much because then their email box was over flooded, but that was what we were trying to do, is just make sure that we were communicating as much as we could with them.
Thank you, Jana. Tom, do you have anything to add about how you've supported students differently? I know that your students are all online, so do you have any tips or tricks just in general from your normal processing and normal communications?
So yeah, shortly after we went remote, I think every financial aid office has issues with this. You talk to a student, a prospective student, wherever they're at in your enrollment cycle, you talk to them, say, go do your FAFSA. And then they get off the phone and then they get busy. We started making sure to send up what I call follow-up emails. They're real basic emails that say, hey, I just talked to you. It was great talking. Here are the things that you need to do in order to complete your funding. And we have like a way of doing it where you can add in the specific things. So you need a FAFSA, you picked for verification, you need this, you need that. But to just make sure to follow up with those students on it, so they have it in writing. Then in that email, they've got our contact info. We do use also, it's an app called Calendly. It's like calendar, but without the ER on the end. Yeah, it's awesome. We use it for students setting up appointments. So when they go through and do things, they can make an appointment with us. We are actually also open for business from about 8 to 7. So students can call us in the off hours. Particularly during the start of COVID, we found that students, they were dealing with quite a bit and they wouldn't get back to their funding documents until later in the evening. So we would make sure to have people there to cover phones, and that lasts like 2 hours of the day. We do have students all over the country and actually all over the world. So one of the big issues we ran into is finding notaries that were open or are still open, because that's something they still got to take care of. So we used to actually hold a list in the big areas, how to find somebody that was open, for them to either do it by drive-through or something. When the department gave some leeway in that department back in April, that was a big thing for my office, because we were telling B4, B5 students, like, well, you got to get that done before we can do anything. The second that came out, we called everybody and was like, hey, you can now do this versus that. But just making sure that they have that takeaway, I think, is what's key to supporting any student, whether if it's COVID related or not, is making sure that they have it all in writing, on what they need to do.
Thank you. That's great information. Brenda, do you have anything to add about how you've been supporting students specifically during the COVID times?
Yeah, specifically about COVID, I was just writing down some stuff. I think we've also started an online scheduling tool from Sign Up Genius. That's something, no brainer there. We bought a little account. It's $10 a month or something like that. And it's something I found when we were doing youth soccer with the boys. And so it's been nice for us to help us. We also have added COVID-19 as a drop reason on our drop forms for the online students in particular. And I'll tell you, one of the decisions that we're trying to make right now is, do we early implement the new R2T4 regulations, which are beautiful and wonderful, or do we wait a little bit so that people can take advantage of the COVID-19 flexibilities with their dropping? I think we're going to go ahead where half of us are more excited about going ahead with the new regs, just because they will keep us from doing as many withdrawals as we have done in our modular program, online program, which will ultimately help us all. But it will, not allow the student to have their stuff canceled, but we're still thinking about it, thinking it through. Anyway, but we did those two things. Then we are also really helping a lot. We're helping with PJ, which we're kind of trying to be hyper vigilant there. And that is one way, I've got 2 or 3 offices. If the student life team and the student success team and any coach those folks I talk, we have an SST meeting, which stands for Student Services Team, and those offices are all represented on that team. And what I've just constantly been, every time I'm allowed to speak at that meeting and we go and do a roundtable update, I talk about, just remember everyone, if there's, our appeal form is here, if anyone says anything about being financially stressed, make them fill out an appeal form, get them into our office, have them connect with me. If they won't connect, you help them connect, that kind of thing. So we're just constantly out there surveying the environment and trying to sniff out people who are, in trouble and not saying anything, because kids they'll just, if they can't solve the problem, they'll just go. They can't figure out how to solve it themselves. And folks, that happens even with kids whose parents work in financial aid. My son had a problem, stinker, with this is how it goes. And I, as a parent who's a college graduate, I coached him through this. But I think about every time this stuff happens with my son, he had a moment in his freshman year in college where he got overwhelmed. And he called me. That was one of your, when your kids call you at 7 in the morning or 10, 11, 12 at night, it's never going to be a fun conversation. But 7 in the morning, he called me and was stressing out, being overwhelmed by just stuff. And so I connected him to resources. And I think that's fine for us. And we worked it through. But there's a lot of kids out there that don't have parents to call. And so when they get overwhelmed about money, they don't know that they have help available. So I try very hard to get the message out there to let influencers know that we are here to help and here's the process. Those are the things I was thinking about that are different than what other people have mentioned. And just knowing my flexibilities, keeping up to date with the flexibilities allowed through CARES with the IRS and documentation and things like that Tom was talking about are very good.
Great, thank you, Brenda. Very, very important things there. Tony, do you have anything else you'd like to add that other panelists haven't mentioned?
No, I think the biggest thing, the challenge lies, like everyone's mentioning, is it's not only the financial stresses of anything, but of everything that we're dealing with. But I also serve on a committee that has been put together by our academic dean, where students are allowed to appeal to take the remainder of their semester remotely, instead of if they're dealing with stresses or if they've got family scenarios. So, but one of the reason I bring that up is that it is kind of amazing to see how many more students are being impacted by emotional stress, some depressive natures of what they're dealing with. So it definitely is becoming a challenge because, like what Brenda said, it's the easy thing to do is to shut down. Don't say anything, because it's kind of like going into a meeting and not asking a question because I don't want to look stupid. But if it's still something you don't know, it's not a stupid question. You still want to know the answer. So one of the things that we're starting this semester, we're kind of dipping our toes into it, but ironically enough, this week, we're starting to identify different clubs or groups of students. Like I mentioned before, how when we do the FAFSA notification, we send it out to all students or those that are all applicable. Well, it's tough to open up when you're in a big group of people. So we're starting to reach out to some of the different organizations. And this week we have we're being invited for the first time to one of our student groups, the Black Student Union. I chatted with them about, hey, we would like to be able to show you our interest in helping, in letting you know that we're here to help, whenever you have things going on. And in having that conversation, we're getting the opportunity to meet with them. So we'll look at a number of different groups. If we can try to break it down to make it more of a personal approach versus, trying to present to a large group, that hopefully we will be able to reinforce to them. Because one of the struggles we also have is that if students, are uncertain about something, the first people they ask are their friends. Well, their friends aren't financial aid professionals. So, they'll give their interpretation of what they think the rules are, and you find out, oh, shoot, I made a decision based, so-and-so told me this. Well, sorry, so-and-so doesn't work in our office. And that's one of the struggles, whether it's an eligibility thing, whether it's an aid, when I say eligibility, it could be their athletic eligibility, it could be their academic eligibility, it could be a financial aid issue, some of those things. So we're really trying to reach out to them to give them a sense of not looking at the financial aid office as an administrative office, but we're here to help. We want to be a part of their team too. So that's what we're trying to do right now.
Thank you, Tony. There was an article on supporting students during COVID-19 way back in probably late March, early April, when things really started getting crazy. And some of the things that were on there, and one of the big ones was don't ignore the elephant in the room. Talk about COVID-19 and the fear of it and the unknowns that everyone is struggling with. And to Brenda's point, there's some students that don't have the support system at home to talk through those fears. So, don't be afraid to just say, how you doing through all this? How's things going for you? And let them have a place to vent. I know as financial aid administrators, a lot of times we joke that, we don't have the right degree for the kind of counseling we end up doing sometimes, but you can make real impacts on students by caring more about them than just their FAFSA and just their documentations that we need to get from them. So don't forget that. All right, anyone else want to share anything about, how they're supporting students, or do you have any questions on how possibly regarding supporting your students during these times, or just in general, connecting with students and being an advocate for them? I'm going to be quiet for a minute and see if anyone will pop in. Feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, or use the chat function. If you're not seeing the chat, Darcy did share that there's a big portion of Emporia State faculty and staff that send handwritten note cards to students within the last month, just letting them know that they're in this with them, they're all in this together, wishing them success. So that's a great idea if there's resources to do such a thing. Tony says me too, he raised his hand, I think. And I know that, everyone on this call is a student advocate first, and, we do care about the well-being, and it's been challenging for us, let alone for some of our students. So anything you can do to make that easier. Okay, we have a quiet group. Let's move on to our fourth quarter, and then hopefully we can just talk some other topics and maybe get some questions or some topics from our participants. So participants, if you can come up with one idea of just something, could be anything regarding financial aid, the work environment, regulations, anything like that for overtime. But for the fourth quarter, the topic is emergency funding process. I'm going to be pretty honest here and tell you that I've kept up with reading articles here and there, but I have not had to be involved in this since I'm not in the school anymore. So panelists, I'm going to let you start out with Tom this time and let us hear how and how things have went for you at Grantham with the emergency funding and how you've been awarding the funds and utilizing that funding from the government.
Yeah, so this will be funny for anybody that follows my favorite team, the Alabama Crimson Tide here. We don't have any emergency funding under the CARES Act or any of that. None of that changed. We weren't eligible for it because we are a for-profit private university. So I'm not going to play the fourth quarter. So there you go.
All right. See, I didn't even know that and think through that. So thank you, Tom. We'll say Tom's fouled out for right now. Substitution, please. Okay, we'll move on. Brenda, will you discuss how Southwestern has utilized the funds?
Sure. And I know this group in particular has had extensive conversations about this. We met through that period of time. I know a lot, which I enjoyed that. And I'm glad this time frame happened again, because it's good to see y'all down there. We need to keep that up. But I didn't do another one because I saw this was coming out. So we, yes, have both received both pieces of our CARES funding and have used it. We are down to now, I think, 8 uncanceled checks that we're trying to chase down so that we can finalize those. I think, of course, the billing ladies are doing everything they can to find those students so we can get that money in those kids' hands. But if it goes on too much further, I'm pretty sure our office is focused, or we're focused on not having to report after the new year. We want to report just one or two more reports and then be done. So I think we are probably, if those kids can't be located, we'll be canceling those checks out and reissuing them to someone else. It's probably what in total $6,000, you know, nothing serious left. So we are nearly spent completely. We have spent, and we are reporting, which all of that is being handled by the business office. I'm not involved at all, with the exception of sending them a list of names to write checks to. That's kind of my extent. But we sent them, in essence, we wrote checks to our Pell eligible students and spent the money evenly. We gave people with 0 EFCs more than we gave people with any Pell eligibility. So we just essentially took the money that we had and divided it equally among those persons. And then we had to do a little bit of a follow-up this fall to 0 EFC only. It was ended up being $150 just to get the whole fund spent. And so then we have now drawn down all of the institutional funding, and I'm pretty sure that's been, that has already been spent. And so the most recent activity that I've been involved with on that one is the reporting piece. And I've just been shooting everything I hear about it from NASFA to Elizabeth, my counterpart over in billing. And we've just been working to make sure that happens. But again, focused on getting the money out there and spent so we don't have to do this forever. That's what we're doing.
So it sounds like Brenda's wrapping up the process quite a bit. Tony, do you have anything to add or any different experience on that?
We followed a kind of a similar method as what Brenda did. Where we stand right now, we got all of our monies expended back in May. Part of the logic with the committee that was put together was we kept seeing where there was interpretation and there was, new advisement coming out on each of these things. And the decision was, let's get this money spent as quickly as possible. One, so that way we didn't have to worry about, are we doing this right? Are we not doing this right? But also by getting all of the student portion spent, that meant we could be able to recoup all of our institutional portion, which from the finance office standpoint was very important, considering all the prorations we did on room and board for the spring semester. So all of our money's been spent. The method we used primarily was, rather than just looking at EFCs, we basically did if you want to call it an unmet need, but we did not use any of their loans or anything along those lines. We basically used an unmet need of their institutional charges with gift. So those students which was basically a good majority of them, I think it ended up taking care of like 1,200 of them with the limited funds that we had. We kind of stair-stepped the dollar amounts that a number of students that each range got. But we were able to, like I said, expend monies out to between 1,100 and 1,200 students. It's always tough. Do you give bigger dollar amounts to some and then some don't get any? Do you try to divvy it out a little more equity so as many as possible get a share of the pie? I think that was the biggest challenge I mean, if you think about it with what we all deal with right now when it comes to our SEOG monies, our Kansas comp monies, you know, trying to get the biggest bang for your buck to help as many as you can. That's always the biggest challenge we have in all of these. But yeah, fortunately, we got all of ours expended. The reporting side of it is handled by our finance office. And I have not heard a report or anything on whether or not we've got any uncashed checks yet or anything, but that's being handled by our finance and Bursar's offices. So I'll let them have that.
That's kind of you, Tony. Jana, would you like to share at Baker how the emergency funding process went?
Yeah, so just like Tony and Brenda, very similar. We didn't do a tiered process though. There was a lot of back and forth in that decision, and we just decided that all of the ones that had completed a FAFSA that were valid, they would just get a chunk of the money. So it was divided evenly, paid out quickly. Obviously, for a lot of the same reasons Tony said, the business office really wanting that institutional funds. They needed those so that they could actually help with some of the debt that the university had taken on due to refunds. So I don't really have too much to add about that. I mean, our finance department's doing the reporting. Thank you, Brenda, for bringing up the checks thing, because I might just send that to them and say, hey, have you checked on this? Just to make sure they're following up with that, because that's not something that we have done. One thing that Baker did do, and I don't know, maybe some other schools that have endowment funds, we reached out to our donors and just requested, you know, like, if you have the ability to support our students, we want to give them an opportunity to appeal if they weren't able to receive care funds, or if they did and they have additional needs or things that they are seeing. And so we were able to raise quite a bit of money through our donors and our friends of the university. And so then we put forth an appeals form for students that were seeing financial struggles. And then it was really up to a committee of us that was comprised of myself and the finance committee to come up with what that dollar amount was. For example, let's say they had to go home. So they ended up having a rent agreement here still in the city, and they couldn't pay it plus be at home. You know, just kind of all the different things that took place as we all shut down. And so we just kind of looked at those and decided, you know, do we help them with 50% of that? Do we pay it all? Like, how do we help this student come back to the university in the fall? So we saw lots of different requests with different bills. I mean, some as simple as they didn't have a place to stay. So we paid for a hotel room until they could, like, we had one student who was doing they were helping in a business, like overseeing kind of the day-to-day operations. And that business was considered essential. So they were still able to go in, but that student needed somewhere to stay. Well, with the university closing down, there was nowhere for them to go. So we found out they were staying in their car. Luckily, like Brenda refers to them as our influencers, they are the ones that will give us that information. And so we quickly moved to get that student into a hotel room for amount of time and use those funds. So purely reactive in some cases, but hoping that we could help those students so that they could, in a way, be proactive with the fall term.
Thank you, Jana. Okay, guys, we have come to the end of what is our regulation, we will call it, and we do have quite a bit of time left. So I'm hoping that we can get some topics from the participants on literally on anything. This is an open forum kind of discussion. So if you have a specific question on how to process a specific verification or, you know, packaging philosophy or work study or anything, please don't be shy. You have some very knowledgeable folks on a panel here that are be more than willing to share their expertise. So challenge them. What kind of question can you stump them with? I am going to throw one out that's not too much of a stump, but it's something that a school mentioned to me that they were looking at trying to change. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with COVID or anything, but just exploring how other schools do this. And the topic was payment plans and what different payment plans, if there's charges, financing charges, and how, I mean, if you go across the nation, schools differ so much with this. So if that's of interest and something to share, to see what kind of different payment plans schools have, I'll throw that one out as a first one in overtime. And please, participants, anything, throw us anything that you have out there that you can, been wondering about. Financial aid is I've always joked that you could read books up and down to the ceiling and back 100 times and still not know all of it. So you've got to have some questions. So Brenda, do you want to start? Tell us what Southwestern does for payment plans or what you wish they did.
So we would like people to pay their bill. So so yes, we participate in payment plans. We do whatever works for the kid. We have some standard things. It's kind of like, I like to say, you set up your system for the herd to go through, and then there's always going to be the strays that don't follow the herd, and you've got to have, but at least if the herd is directed, then you can be more flexible with the few strays, which I think at a smaller school, there is more than a few. One of the things that I think smaller schools, private schools, pride themselves on is being responsive, right, to our customers. So we do have a payment plan. It's run by, I don't know who. It's kind of going through a CashNet. There's some third-party servicer issue happening that I have to do the PPA update on. But it's standard payment plans. We set up standard 4-month and 5-month payment plans per semester. And then when a student can't follow those plans, which we're having those conversations on a daily basis, more so last week and the week prior, because that was sign up class registration for spring. And so, you can't register if you've got a balance and no plan. So we've talked about this a lot, but if we have students who can't do the standard, we talk to them and we set something up custom. So there you go. But most of the time, I think the billing office is focused on trying to get the student to pay the balance within the 12-month period. Sometimes that stretches into summer, but they have the flexibility over there to customize things so that there's at least a plan in place.
Does anybody else want to share? Do you have anybody have any unique payment plans or payment options, panelists or participants?
Yeah, so I'll hop in here. With the way that our funding plans go, each student, we work it as you normally would, with Title IV aid. We also do the TA and the VA. If your direct cost is not met by any of those, we actually have a line on our funding plan that says student payment. It gives them the amount, so that when we're talking with them, they see up front before the term even starts that they're going to have a payment, what those are, and then we kind of talk them through the plan. It's just 50-50, so 50% due on the week 1, 50% due midway through. We're 8-week terms. So when you present a student with 2 payments that are, for one class, it's $750. 2 of those over the space of 2 months, they really realize that, hey, I need to go fill out my FAFSA because I can't spend $750 every month on these courses. So that's kind of a little shock and awe, as I like to call it. When students see that on their plan, they're like, I got to go do my funding. It does require some rework on the staff, but it does help with the collections and payments and all of that. Then once the student does say, yeah, I'm paying out of pocket, we actually get them the information to sign up for their payment plan and everything. We use Nelnet, so they can set it up through that function. But yeah, it's usually a good shock and awe for students on having it on the plan.
Anyone else want to share anything on payment plans? or bring up a new topic?
I think McPherson's got something pretty cool, and I was just trying to, and the initials are escaping me, but I'm curious to know, is anyone in this group researching, looking into ISAs or IPA? What are they called? Oh my gosh, they're the it's not a loan, but it's a payment plan where you.
It's an
Income sharing agreement.
IHS,
Yeah.
Brenda. This is Dara from McPherson College.
Yeah.
And it's the IHS, it's Interfaith Housing Services.
Nope, not cash.
Not that one?
Not that. I'm talking about
Income sharing.
Income sharing agreements.
income share agreements, ISAs.
We're starting to look into.
Lauren knows. Are you, Tony?
We're currently talking with, we're talking with, I'm trying to remember the name of the company that's proposed the idea. I know one of our over here in just across the border, Rockhurst University just signed on to utilize it. So when they had their big presentation about what they were doing, we've started the talks, which is very interesting. I guess part of the idea is right now, you could look at it from the standpoint of you give out maybe need-based aid from your institution that you're not going to get any of that back. Well, maybe you could transition that into an income sharing agreement where you can give them additional more out of it, but maybe a portion of that in future years, they pay some of that back to you. So it maybe a delayed revenue side of that to where the students have some buy-in. The institution has some skin in the game as well on it, both. Right now, we're getting ready, actually, matter of fact, tomorrow, to have a presentation by them done to our CFO, because of course, anything when it comes to income sharing, anything along those lines, you got to get your CFO to buy in. So we're taking a look at it from financial aid admission standpoint. We're interested in it, but again, it's got to pay.
That's kind of where it's at here. And we had that CFO turnover here, so it just kind of all fell. We were looking at it pretty seriously a year ago now, and then COVID, and we lost our CFO. So sort of went by the wayside. It's interesting.
Now, here at McPherson, we also have what we call the Debt Project, which the students have jobs off campus and furnish us their pay stubs, and then whatever payments they make that they can furnish pay stubs for, we do match 25 cents to the dollar on that. I don't know if that's similar to what you guys are thinking there.
That is not at all similar, but that's the program that I was good. I'm glad you spoke out, Derek, because that program is pretty cool. It's on their website if any of you want to look at it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, we went from having, I don't know, maybe 12 last year to, I think we got over 100 this year within that program.
Good stuff, guys. Thanks for sharing. All right. I'm gonna one last call for anybody to give a question, and then we're gonna go double overtime, and I'm gonna give Diane from the Kansas Board of Regents a couple minutes to give us a quick update. So any last questions, get them in the chat or raise your hand. And Diane, if you want to go ahead and give us what you have to share.
All righty, let me get going here. Okay, so first off, thanks you for the opportunity. I don't really have very much I wanted to talk about, just a couple of things. One is, I think it's kind of interesting, back last spring when the COVID pandemic hit, the state was talking about the fact that we would have a $1.5 billion shortfall for this next year. So of course, everything, was cut off, as far as any new programs or anything that they were looking at for this next year and where we're going to cut and all of this. Now, all of a sudden, just about yesterday, I guess it was, they came out with, it was $153 million shortfall. So there's quite a little difference between 1.5 billion and 153 million. And I don't know if they're just off that much. And I know a lot of it, they said, had to do with like the fact that the state taxes were delayed from April to July. So, they weren't getting the revenue in that they had thought they were, people had put off paying, different things like that. But I think it's still very tentative. It's hard to say, how this will really end up. I didn't have a chance to talk to any of you, of course, last spring, but there were like 4 different programs that were introduced for financial aid assistance last session. None of them made it through because of the pandemic, partially. There were 2 that may be coming back up again, and I'll just mention one of them briefly. That is, it's called the Promise Act. As you know, a lot of states have these right now. This particular one went through a lot of morphing, and so the final product, I'm sure, will be changed again. But what they had come up with was, it was basically for community colleges and independent colleges that would have associate type degrees, where the students' tuition and fees would be covered in books. But there were a lot of caveats to it that I didn't care for, and we kept trying to get them to take it out, but they wouldn't. And one was that the students would have to have so many hours of community service. They're going to have to repay it, if they don't follow through. So it's a service obligation. We were trying to battle with those things, but legislators like those service obligation kind of programs. So I have a feeling it's going to come back up again, because one of the legislators who was really strongly an advocate of it is a pretty dominant force in the legislature. So she would probably really push to have that come back up again. The other one was the Kansas Access Partnership Grant, which was a program that the money would be matched by the college's endowment, and it would need to be new money. And initially it was, I think, just an idea for the Regents schools. And then they added on the private schools, and then the community colleges wanted to be on board too. And it was like, I don't know if all these schools are going to be able to come up with these matches very easily, especially the community college sector, and really even some of our independent colleges would have a hard time with that. So I think it's also coming back up again. I just don't know again what realm, and what the different areas will be like once they mess around with it again some more. Lastly, I just did have a kind of a question for you all, and that is, how are you going to handle, or have you run into this being a problem, with any scholarships that you might have that require the ACT, and are you having any problems with your students being able to take the ACT?
Diane, we went test optional last year, and we have no ACT or SAT requirement anymore.
Okay.
So
We
Baker
didn't
has,
go test optional. We went the route of, if you could take it, then we would apply use that for your scholarship determination. But if you were not able to take it, then we have a formula, I guess you call it, in place as to what we would determine what they would qualify for. So we still like for them to take it, but we allow it to not go through if they don't have it.
we're the same way as Tony. So we are still taking ACT and GPA to determine academic scholarships, but we have a test optional type admittance as well that we will determine academic scholarship off that. I have talked with our admission staff a couple of times about access to the ACT, and I think that is the biggest concern right now for admissions folks, is even though it might still be available, the access that students have to it, the ability for them to go take it, that kind of thing. So I think it's probably something that Baker will definitely look at for the subsequent enrollment year, to maybe remove all those ACT requirements, SAT requirements.
Yeah, see, our concern is our state scholarship, because it's got the formula that it includes the ACT and the GPA, and that's how we determine it. And I kind of hate to move just solely to a GPA and not even review an ACT. And I've talked to some of our other states. We had our national state grant conference a couple of weeks ago, and most of them are which there aren't a lot of states that do the same way that we do. But those that I talked with indicated that they did not so far see that there had been a problem with students being able to take the test. But I'm not sure if that's entirely true. I don't know. I think what we might find would be that those students who are wanting to retake it to get a better score might have had difficulty trying to retake. But so we're just trying to decide, what are we going to do here? If we run into an issue with students that are unable to take it or didn't take it, and what's going to be a fair thing to do. I don't want to have two different ways of determining their eligibility. I want to look at just GPA for some students, and then the combination, the formula like we've always done. So
It's It's a good question, Diane, and I will say, because I had a senior last year and his ACT test was done before COVID. And so I don't think there's a big problem with the seniors last year. I think it's the seniors this year because the free ACT here occurs in the fall. And so if you're in a high school that's not meeting or not meeting online and you live in a place that doesn't, you live in a house that doesn't have internet or support at home, I could see there's some real access issues this year.
Yeah.
It's an interesting problem that you're facing there.
I know.
Diane, I think I'll even chime in. I'm worried about our SRs for this year, but I think even for our juniors who are going to be on that admit cycle for the next year after that,
Right.
because they're losing out on at least kind of 1 or 2 extra opportunities. So they're kind of their quote practice ACT for real becomes their real test.
Yeah.
You know how most students kind of take it that 2 or 3 times. So yeah, definitely some issues that we might see for years to come.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm afraid so. Well, I appreciate your insights on that because we've kind of been going back and forth with that. But we got to make a decision very quickly. That's
Thanks,
really all.
Diane.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
bringing your question.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, we have one last call. We're going to wrap up here. We want to thank you all for participating. But if you do have any last topics, real quick, let us know. I'm going to go on to our final slide here and show you, at least I think I'm going to, show you our final score today. The home team went 184 to 28, so it was a little bit of a blowout, but that's okay. Special thank you to all of the panelists today, the Professional Development Committee. We had a couple members on. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. We had a couple members on from the Professional Development Committee, so if you saw some people that weren't necessarily in the private sector, that is why. And thank you again for everyone that attended. There is a link to the survey. Julie just posted it in the chat as well. And please, please, please go touch that survey. It'll only take you a couple of minutes, but it helps us, the Professional Development Committee, know what topics and what formats you would like to see from professional development in the future as we proceed in the near future and as well through the, further out. So do take the survey quickly if you can, please. I don't see anybody sticking up their hand or putting any comments in the chat, so we'll give you a couple minutes back to your day. Thank you so much for attending, and have a great rest of your Monday and have a great week.